the snow, the silence, and the first letters. The winter sky above Stalingrad hung like a cracked sheet of iron, cold, unmoving, and ancient. Snow drifted down in thin, ghostly spirals, settling over ruins that no longer even resembled a city. Buildings stood like broken ribs against the gray horizon, and every gust of wind carried the scent of smoke, frozen earth, and something far heavier, the scent of a battle that refused to end. It was December 1942, and the city had already swallowed more than 100,000 men, German, Russian, and everything in between. But inside the shattered shell of a former apartment block, illuminated only by the glow of a dying fire, a young German soldier leaned over a scrap of paper. His name was Karl Müller, 21 years old, a baker's son from Cologne. The pencil trembled in his hand, not from fear, but from the cold that gnawed through wool, skin, and bone. He pressed the paper against his knee, took a slow breath, and began to write the first lines of a letter he wasn't sure would ever reach home. "My dearest mother," he wrote, pausing as the wind moaned through the shattered window frame. "You won't believe how quiet a battlefield can become. The silence, it feels like the city is holding its breath." He lifted his head and listened. Even silence in Stalingrad wasn't truly silent. There were distant cracks of rifles, the muted thud of artillery miles away, the whisper of snow settling on bodies that lay untouched. But compared to the chaos they had endured in the past weeks, it felt almost peaceful. Karl closed his eyes for a moment, collecting his thoughts. The stump of his pencil tapped lightly against the paper. A sound swallowed instantly by the ruins around him. Behind him, other members of his platoon huddled around the faint fire, their faces hollow, their eyes reflecting exhaustion that went beyond physical. Some stared into nothing, some rubbed frost from their fingers, and some simply slept sitting upright, because lying down meant a risk of never waking again. But Karl kept writing. "I want you to know, we aren't the monsters the newspapers say. We're just boys who miss home. Boys who miss warm bread, and laughter, and the sound of footsteps on wooden floors." His handwriting wavered. A sudden gust blew in through the broken window and snuffed the fire down to embers. Someone cursed softly. From the corner, Sergeant Weber, older, lean, his uniform hanging off him like loose cloth, shifted his weight and spoke. "Still writing letters, Müller?" His voice was rough, but not unkind. Karl looked up. "If we don't write now, we might never get the chance." Weber nodded slowly, as if the truth of that sentence was heavier than ammunition. Outside, the crunch of snow echoed, a patrol moving through the rubble. German? Russian? At this point, no one could tell until it was too late. Karl lowered his head and continued. "Mama, people say Stalingrad will be over soon. They say the Russians are exhausted. But I don't believe them anymore. The cold fights for them. The streets fight for them. This city, it wants to swallow us." He hesitated. Should he tell her the truth? Should he write about the hunger? About the frostbite creeping into fingertips and toes? About the men who coughed blood into the snow? He swallowed hard. "We haven't had fresh food in days. Some men melt snow in their helmets just to drink. But don't worry for me. I'm still strong. I'm still hopeful." It was a lie. But he needed her to believe it. He needed himself to believe it. A shell burst in the distance, shaking dust from the ceiling. No one even flinched anymore. To his right, a thin, pale soldier named Matthias leaned closer. "What are you writing this time?" he whispered. "Another love letter to your mother?" Karl smiled faintly. "Someone has to worry about me." Matthias pulled his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Wish I had someone to write to," he said. "Lost both parents when I was 12. The letter I write goes into my pocket. At least it stays with me." His voice was calm, but beneath it lay a quiet resignation. Karl returned to his page. I dream of home, Mama. I dream of the bakery. Of warm bread coming out of the oven. The smell, oh, what I would give for that smell again. The wind howled in reply, filling the room with icy fingers. He continued writing, letting the words carry him away from Stalingrad, if only for a moment. We sleep in the ruins of what used to be apartments. Sometimes I see toys in the rubble. A small doll. A wooden horse. Books torn open and scattered like leaves. It makes me wonder what happened to the families who lived here. Did they run? Did they hide? Are they still alive? He paused again. Maybe they hate us, he whispered to Matthias. Maybe they look at us the way we look at the enemy. Matthias shook his head. At this point, Karl, the enemy is the cold, not the Russians. A faint laugh swept the group, short, hollow, defeated. But a laugh nonetheless. The sergeant called out softly from his corner. Finish your letters quickly, boys. We move again before dawn. A low murmur spread across the room. No one wanted to move. Movement meant exposure. Exposure meant death. But orders were orders. Karl forced himself to keep writing, faster now, because time was running out. Mama, if this letter reaches you, know that I think of you every day. Know that I carry your prayers like a shield inside my chest. They keep me warm, even when the snow freezes my eyelashes. His pencil scratched across the final lines. Tell Marie I haven't forgotten her. Tell her I still carry the ribbon she gave me. Tell her I still believe I'll return home, and when I do, I'll bring back stories she'll never forget. He signed it quietly. Your son. Karl. He folded the paper carefully, slipping it into an envelope that he had reused twice already. Ink stains covered the edges, the stamp had been peeled off one letter and glued to another. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except that the words existed. Even if the letter never left Stalingrad, it meant Karl had spoken to home one more time. A deep rumble rolled over the city, Soviet artillery. Closer than before. Sergeant Weber stood and tightened his coat. That's our cue, he said. Pack everything. Even your letters. Karl tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of his tunic. It lay close to his heart. Outside, the snow continued falling. Soft, gentle, indifferent. A strange contrast to the hell that lay beneath it. Before leaving the room, Karl paused and looked back. The walls, once painted warm colors, were now scorched, cracked, and riddled with bullet holes. The fire had died completely. The shadows moved like ghosts. For a moment, he imagined hearing footsteps. A woman's voice. A child laughing. A family living here long before the war came. But the vision faded as quickly as it arrived. He turned and followed his platoon into the frozen street, their breaths rising like smoke signals into the night. Stalingrad greeted them with its usual silence. A silence filled with waiting, hunger, and death. And somewhere beneath Karl's coat, pressed against his chest, the letter lay warm for the last time. The city that refused to die. The days that followed were like a slow descent into a nightmare. Stalingrad was no longer a city, it was a maze of shattered stones, burning factories, collapsed tram lines, and bodies buried beneath endless layers of dust. Every step felt like walking through the remains of an earthquake that never stopped shaking. Yet, amid this ruin, letters still found their way into soldiers' hands, pieces of paper stained with soot and sweat, carrying the voices of families who refused to stop believing their sons would come home. Letter 3 Mikhail to his sister, September 26, 1942. Katya. I don't know if this will reach you, but I must write anyway. Today, I saw the Volga caught on fire. Imagine that, a river on fire. Oil barrels burst open, and flames danced on the water like torches floating downstream. The air smelled of smoke and burnt metal. But what shocked me most was how life still clings to this place. I saw a cat, thin but alive, staring at us from the roof of a ruined trolley. I shared my bread with it. Maybe that is foolish, but here, kindness feels like rebellion. We fight for every floor of every building. At night, the Germans shell us without mercy. Yet the moment the shelling stops, I hear someone playing a harmonica. I don't know who he is, but I pray he never stops. Nadia would not read this letter for 7 months. The soldiers' world narrows. By early October, the front line shrank to a few ruins: the tractor factory, the Red October plant, Pavlov's house. The men fought room by room, stair by stair, sometimes even through the same wall, punching holes with grenades to surprise enemies a meter away. They slept in basements that shook like drums. They ate soup made from melted snow and whatever barley they could scrape together. But still, they wrote. Writing reminded them they were human. Letter 4, Hans to his father, October 2nd, 1942. Father. You told me war builds a man's character. I understand now that it destroys it first. We advanced into the factory district yesterday. The Russians were everywhere, behind pipes, inside broken machines, beneath metal sheets. They appeared like ghosts in the smoke. One Russian soldier shouted something before throwing a grenade. I couldn't understand him, but his voice cracked like he was speaking to someone he loved. I sometimes wonder if their letters sound like ours. Hans never learned the answer. The cemetery without graves. In mid-October, the weather turned. The cold arrived suddenly, wet, sharp, unforgiving. Soldiers who had survived bullets now faced frostbite. Fingernails turned black. Breath froze inside scarves. Ammo jammed. Food froze solid. In this frozen hell, letters gained a new meaning. They became promises of warmth, of rooms with wooden stoves, of dinners that no longer existed for them except in memory. Letter V. Nadia to her husband, October 14th, 1942. Yura. I heard that the fighting is close to the grain elevator. I pray you are far from there. Every morning I walk to the post station. The woman there knows me now. She shakes her head gently before I ask. I pretend I don't understand what it means. The children draw pictures of you. They say you will read them when you come home. I tell them yes, of course, because if I say otherwise, I fear the words will break me. Nadia kept writing even after her village ran out of candles. She wrote in the dark, hoping someone, somewhere, would ensure her words reached the ruins of Stalingrad. The struggle for the grain elevator. The grain elevator, once filled with wheat, became a fortress. The building burned from the inside, and roasted grain filled the air with a strange, haunting smell. Men fought until their last bullet, then used stones, knives, even fists. In the final hours, a handful of defenders held off hundreds. When the Germans finally overran it, they found soldiers who had starved but never surrendered. One of them carried a letter that was never sent. Unsent letter Nikolai to his mother. Mama. You always told me courage was not loud. You were right. Today, courage is simply refusing to step back. If this letter stays in my pocket, know that I did not die alone. I died with men who called each other brothers, even when we shared nothing but hunger. Kiss the earth for me when spring comes. The paper was found under his coat, scorched but readable. The world begins to close in. By the end of October, Stalingrad became a trap neither side could escape. Buildings collapsed faster than they could be rebuilt. The Volga froze. Supplies slowed. Wounded soldiers lay in bunkers where the temperature fell below zero. But still, against all reason, letters moved. Some were carried by medics. Others by runners who risked sniper fire. A few were tucked into the coats of wounded men heading back across the river. Many never left the city at all. Yet the writing continued, because hope is stubborn. Letter 6, Hans to his mother, October 30th, 1942. Mother. Do not worry for me. I keep your scarf inside my jacket. It smells faintly of home. We heard that the fighting will end soon, but none of us believe it. The Russians fight like men defending their own children. I have never seen such will. Yesterday a Russian prisoner shared his last cigarette with me. He said one word, enough. I think we both agreed. Hans did not know that winter would bring anything but enough. November approaches. Snow fell on Stalingrad like a burial shroud. The ruins softened under white layers, but the guns never stopped. Every night, flares lit up the sky, turning snow red and gold. And somewhere in the rubble, men kept writing letters, letters that crossed enemy lines only in memory. Because soon, the battle would change forever. The trap closes. By mid-November 1942, Stalingrad had become more than a battlefield. It was a graveyard of hopes, frozen dreams, burned-out machines, and shattered loyalties. Snow covered the ruins like a thin blanket that could not hide the truth. Both armies were exhausted, starving, and desperate. But beneath this exhaustion, something was shifting. Something neither side expected. The storm before the storm. The days grew shorter. The wind turned sharper. Snow fell sideways, carried by a bitter wind that cut through coats and bones. Soldiers huddled in ruins that barely stood upright, warming their hands over tiny fires made from broken furniture. Both armies believed winter might slow the fighting. Both were wrong. Because in the shadows beyond the Volga, the Red Army was preparing something vast. Something that would change the war. Letter 7, Mikhail to his mother, November 12, 1942. Mama. The snow is heavy now. It makes the ruins glow white in the moonlight, but don't let that beauty fool you. The cold feels alive. It follows us everywhere. There are rumors of a plan, something big, but no one knows details. Tonight, I stood near a broken wall and watched snow fall through the hole where a window used to be. Everything was silent, until a shell hit a block away and shook the earth again. I wonder if this winter will be my last. But I promise you, if hope survives anywhere, it survives here. Mikhail did not know that the plan he mentioned would begin in just a few days. Operation Uranus begins. On November 19, 1942, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack north and south of Stalingrad. Tanks surged forward through snow-covered fields. Artillery thundered in rolling waves. Infantry charged with cries that echoed across the frozen plains. And suddenly, the German Sixth Army found itself surrounded. It happened so fast that even soldiers on the ground could barely understand it. Letter 8, Hans to his brother, November 22, 1942. Karl. We woke up to the sound of thunder, but it was not the sky, it was Russian guns. Every hour brought worse news. First, they told us the northern flank had fallen. Then the southern. Then the supply road. A sergeant told us we are surrounded. Completely. Some men cheered, thinking the relief army would come soon. Others stared at the ground. I felt nothing, only the cold creeping deeper into my hands. Karl, if we do not break out, I fear this city will become our tomb. His handwriting shook from the cold. The city turns into a cage. Within days, the German Sixth Army, over 250,000 strong, was trapped inside Stalingrad. No retreat. No supplies. No way out except through icy airlifts that failed again and again. Inside the pocket, soldiers ran out of bread, then out of medicine, then out of hope. Horses were slaughtered for food. Frozen corpses were used as walls against the wind. And still, they wrote. Writing became a rebellion against death. Letter 9, Nadia to her husband, November 24, 1942. Yura. I heard on the radio that your army has surrounded the Germans. They say the city will soon be free. But I do not care about victory. I only care about you. Will you come home after this? Every time the door opens, I think it is you. Every night I pray that your hands are warm, that you have something to eat, that the snow does not cover you while you sleep. The children ask if you will be home for New Year. I do not know what to tell them. Please keep writing. Your letters keep me alive. Her voice, though unknown to many soldiers, echoed in the hearts of those who fought. Inside the encirclement. When November shifted into December, temperatures fell even lower. The cold stripped men of their strength. Frost formed inside boots. Weapons cracked. Faces turned white from frostbite. German soldiers wrote letters that never left the pocket. Soviet soldiers wrote letters that crossed frozen rivers on the backs of exhausted runners. Both sides felt the same fear. How much longer can we survive? Letter X Hans to his mother, December 2nd, 1942. Mother. I am writing this in a half-burned house near the tractor factory. Snow blows through a hole in the roof and lands on my paper. We have no food left. Some days we eat one biscuit. Some days nothing. There are no blankets. We sleep pressed together like bricks. A man died next to me last night. He looked peaceful, almost warm, but when I touched his arm, it was ice. Mother, I don't want to die here. I don't want to disappear in a place so far from home. His letter would never reach Germany. It would be found months later in the rubble. The Soviets see the end coming. Soviet soldiers, though better supplied, also suffered terribly. Their boots tore. Their coats froze. Their hands bled. But morale grew, because they knew the encirclement meant something unimaginable earlier in the year. Stalingrad might actually be won. Letter 11 Mikhail to his sister, December 3rd, 1942. Katya. You will not believe this, the enemy is trapped. Truly trapped. Their planes still come, but the supplies fall far from their soldiers. Sometimes we reach the drops first. Today I picked up a German can of food. The metal was so cold it burned my hand. But inside, actual meat. I shared it with my squad. We laughed like children. It was the first time in months I remembered what joy felt like. Joy in Stalingrad never lasted long. December deepens the darkness. As the month dragged on, the city turned darker and quieter. Not because the fighting stopped, but because exhaustion swallowed everything. The German army waited for rescue. The Soviet army waited for collapse. Civilians waited for a miracle. And the snow kept falling. Unsent letter, the German medic, December 10th, 1942. To anyone who finds this. I am tired. Not of the cold or hunger, but of watching young men lose fingers, then hands, then lives. I have no more bandages. No more medicine. Only prayers, and they freeze in my throat. Tell my family I tried. Please, tell them I tried. He folded the letter but never sent it. The end approaches. By Christmas, both armies knew the battle's final act was near. There would be no escape. There would be no second chance. There would only be one last storm. The world held its breath. Because in January, the city would explode with the final struggle. The final letters. By January 1943, Stalingrad no longer resembled a city. It was a skeleton made of ashes, smoke, and silence. Buildings had turned to shells. Streets had become trenches. The wind carried more than snow, it carried the smell of fire, metal, and death. Inside the encircled German Sixth Army, men clung to life by threads thinner than ice. Outside the pocket, Soviet forces prepared the final blow. This was the end. Everyone knew it. Yet even in their final hours, soldiers, on both sides, wrote letters. Because writing gives a human one last chance to be remembered. The last winter. January arrived like a hammer. The temperature dropped below -25 degrees. Breath froze instantly. Boots stiffened like stone. The wind howled through the ruins as if the city itself was screaming. The Red Army began its final offensive on January 10, 1943. Artillery thundered. Tanks rolled forward. Infantry advanced across frozen streets littered with debris. German positions cracked. Then split. Then began to collapse entirely. Supplies were gone. Ammunition was nearly gone. Hope was gone. But the letters continued. Letter 12, Hans to his fiancée, January 12, 1943. Anna. I don't know if this letter will ever leave Stalingrad. But I need to write it. We can hear the Russians advancing. Their guns shake the ground. We are told to hold our positions, but many of the men can barely stand. Their eyes are empty. Their lips are blue. Today we received half a loaf of bread to share among 12 men. It felt like dividing a memory. Anna. I want you to know I thought of you every morning here. Every night. You are the warmth I carry with me. If I don't return, tell my mother that I tried. Tell her I did not run. Hans folded the letter carefully, as if folding it could protect him from the collapse around him. He would write one more time. The Red Army moves in. Soviet infantry pushed deeper into the city. They fought building to building, room to room. Sometimes men battled only meters apart, separated by nothing but a wall that had once been someone's home. The Germans fell back into smaller and smaller pockets. The northern group. The southern group. The central city center pocket, Paulus's headquarters. Winter swallowed everything. Letter 13, Mikhail to his mother, January 18, 1943. Mama. This city is almost ours. We advance house by house. Sometimes we fight an enemy we cannot see. Sometimes we find only wounded men, too weak to lift their rifles. I feel joy, but also something else, something heavy. When I look into the eyes of the German soldiers, I see fear. Real fear. Not for victory. Not for orders. Just fear of dying alone in this frozen place. Mama, I know they were the enemy, but I cannot pretend I do not feel something. Compassion. Sadness. War changes the heart. I hope mine can be healed one day. His letter shows a truth rarely spoken. In the final days, hatred dimmed, exhaustion replaced it. The pocket collapses. By late January, the German army fractured into isolated islands of resistance. Some surrendered in groups. Others held on, waiting for a miracle they knew would never arrive. Hitler ordered them to fight to the last man. But men can only fight hunger, cold, and despair for so long. The city became a maze of surrendering soldiers. And yet, others still wrote. The last entry, a German radio operator's final note, January 24, 1943. Battery dying. Hands numb. Rations gone. We are told no rescue is coming. Tell whoever reads this, we did not choose this fate. We only followed orders. If you find us, Please bury us. The note ended abruptly. The pencil had snapped from the cold. Paulus surrenders. On January 31, 1943, German Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered the southern pocket. 2 days later, on February 2, the northern group surrendered as well. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. What remained was silence. Heavy. Frozen. Unbelievably final. Letter 14, Hans's final letter, never sent, found in the rubble. It was dated January 30, 1943, the night before his surrender. The letter was crumpled. The ink faint. The writing shaky. Anna. This will be my last letter. I cannot feel my hands. I can barely write. The Russians are close. I can hear them in the next street. Some men talk about surrender. Others sit quietly, staring at nothing. I am not afraid anymore. I am only tired. If they take us prisoner, I hope I live long enough to see a warm bed again. But if not, please believe that my last thoughts were of you. You were my reason. My hope. My home. His body was never found. His letter survived. Aftermath. Tens of thousands of German prisoners marched into captivity, many so weak they could barely step forward. Only a small fraction would ever return home. Soviet soldiers walked through the ruins, victorious but broken. They had survived one of the darkest nightmares of the war. The civilians who remained emerged from basements, starving, shivering, but alive. And the letters. The letters remained hidden beneath rubble, in coat pockets, inside walls, and under snow. Some would be found months later. Some decades later. Some never at all. But each one carried the same truth. War destroys everything except the human need to be remembered. A combined voice from both sides. Though they never met. Though they fought each other. Though they lived and died on opposite ends of ruin. Hans, Mikhail, Nadia, the medic, the radio operator, the unknown soldiers. All their letters echo the same message. We were here. We lived. We hoped. We feared. We mattered. Stalingrad took their bodies. History took their names. But their words survived. Quiet. Fragile. Human. And through those words, their voices rise again.